Hi, I'm Greg McCone for Fraser Valley Climate Action, and welcome to section one of climate change for faith communities. And want to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're doing here. So, if you're part of a faith community, you might be looking for the connection between these two topics. And I want you to understand that for me, working on climate change is an act of worship. It's an act of love, an act of service. It does impact every person living on Earth now and every person who will live on Earth in the future. Everyone participates in this, either as part of the problem or part of the solution, or both. We are based in the Fraser Valley here. We are laser focused on climate change. We are laser focused on the biggest factor contributing to climate change, and that is the burning of fossil fuels. And we're actively working to stop climate change. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website at fvclimateaction.org. The QR code on the screen will take you there. There's lots of other resources there. You can read and learn about climate change or actions that you can take. There's lots of invitations to do specific things that are within your power to make a difference for climate change. So, encourage you to check that out later. So, we're going to talk about the unique role of faith communities. Um, and I think this is an important message because I think there's an opportunity here that is currently being missed. So, let's start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that this presentation is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations, part of the Stolo people. I thank the Matsqui and Sumas First Nation who continue to live in this land and continue to care for it along with the waters and all that is above and below. I am a visitor here. I'm trying to live in a good way and walk in a good way on other people's territory, so I thank you. So, the big idea, uh, if you take climate action, taking climate action aligns with faith's teachings and values such as stewardship, thankfulness for the gift of creation, caring for creation, justice for the vulnerable, honesty and truth telling. And we see this in Christian teaching, we see this in Sikh teaching, we see this in Indigenous teaching, and in other places as well. So you might also see these values outside of the faith communities. It's not intended to be exclusive, but yeah, there's an opportunity here. We want to inform faith communities about the theological and scientific reasons for taking action on climate change. Um, who are we? Well, we are people of faith in some cases. Some of our members are. We're not climate scientists. Some of our members are scientists. We are listening to the experts, people who believe that truth matters. And we're volunteers. We're not being paid to do this. We're doing this because it needs to be done. Um, and so there's all kinds of scientists working in all kinds of different capacities there. I got a couple pictures there. And truth matters. So we really we want to help people focus on what is real rather than maybe what is currently believed. We're choosing to act to stop climate change here and now, and we invite you to join us in learning about this, in acting individually and corporately, and joining a local climate group like Fraser Valley Climate Action. So I'd like to just take the temperature about your knowledge. So we'll do this with a quick show of hands. If this is a live event, we'd be doing this, but we're doing this on video for now. So you could just put your hand up or not. I'll never know. Um, so would your friends understand that action on climate change is different from recycling or preserving biodiversity? Or would they be a little bit fuzzy on the differences? So think about whether they'd be clear or whether they'd be fuzzy. How often would you say that your church or your faith group talks about climate change from the front during a teaching time or a prayer time? Is it often? Is it sometimes? Is it never? Is there someone in your group that is a bit of an expert on climate change? You could go to them to learn more, someone that you trust. Do you have someone in mind? Or are you wondering who you would talk to? Okay, and let's take the temperature on action. We'll do a quick show of hands again. How often does your church or faith group have an announcement or an event or a fundraiser related to climate change? Is it often? Is it sometimes? Is it never? Is your building or gathering place designed or retrofitted to be climate friendly? Is that a yes? If you're not sure, the answer is no. And does your group offer climate-friendly options for attending your events? Thanks. Now we know a bit more about each other. So faith calls us to act. It's about more than just us and our entertainment. It's about more than head knowledge. With God's strength and courage and inspiration, we can make a difference in this world. Do we see faith communities leading the world on climate change today? I don't generally see them leading. I know in many cases they're participating. In many other cases, they are totally silent. Now, there are some prominent Christians like Catherine Hayhoe, who's a climate scientist and communicator, a pastor's wife, working in Texas, a Canadian. And she's a good example of someone who's providing climate leadership from the perspective of faith. But the faith community is not known for leading on climate change, not at this point. So hopefully together we can change that. We want to inspire faith communities to act on climate change, both personally, so that our lives are directly improved, and corporately, so that we make an improvement for our community. Do we care about creation, or just the souls, or just the people? Or maybe moving beyond people, do we just care about the animals, or just the cute animals? Or do we care about the whole thing together? Do we value creation above land value? If you think about your investments and where you live, or only when it's convenient. Here's a picture of Eagle Mountain in Abbotsford, where a biodiverse forest was bulldozed to make room for these boutique houses perched on top of the hill. I know people got to live somewhere, but they don't have to live in a biodiverse forest. Being people of faith compels us to act against injustice. Climate change hurts the most vulnerable and is perpetrated by the privileged. When we understand this, we really must act. Maybe it's people far away getting their feet wet, but next year it could be our relatives or our friends. Justice for our neighbors just up the road in Lytton who lost their whole town, which hasn't been rebuilt for 4 years. The point isn't that there have never been tragedies before. It's that climate change is making tragedies like these more severe and more frequent, or more recently in Jasper. Warming in BC meant that there were no harsh winters to kill off the mountain pine beetle. And year after year, the beetle has spread across BC, chewing on pine trees. And when those trees die, they dry out and they leave the forest or the industrial tree farm ready to burn. This creates negative economics for our forest industry, who wants to look at a bunch of dead trees. A negative carbon absorption. Dead trees release carbon into the air, they don't absorb it. Did you know that BC forests are no longer a sink for carbon? A sink means that they would absorb more carbon than they emit. Overall, BC's forests are a source of carbon now. Let that sink in for a minute. Think of all those forests. Isn't it good that they're there to suck up the CO2 and produce oxygen? Well, they're not. They're doing the opposite. If you find that hard to believe, I invite you to dig into the climate science. There's negative economics for the province. When we need to work and pay taxes to pay for firefighting, that means there's less money for healthcare. When we need to bail out the lumber industry, there's less money for healthcare. So there's negative health impacts as the wildfire smoke reaches people with asthma, like my daughter, causing people to need to rush to the hospital for care so they can breathe, which I think is important. There's less availability of doctors and nurses to treat others. Again, negative economics as the demand on healthcare spikes. Negative economics as tourism flounders. No thanks to smoke, no thanks to bug kill, no thanks to burned out forests. Do you see how climate change is affecting the province of British Columbia significantly? Yeah. And look where the pollution has come from. The red at the top, you see the source of most of the CO2 pollution. So Australia in the south and North America, Europe, Russia, a little bit in the Middle East. And then look at the bottom. Red is the most vulnerable. Pretty much Africa, South America, some other parts, right? So if you had to summarize this, and it's oversimplified, you would say that the pollution that has caused climate change has generally come out of the global north and been imposed on the global south. Climate change hurts the most vulnerable, and it is perpetrated by the privileged. And that's us. We're the privileged. When we understand this, we must act. We have a moral and an ethical obligation here. There's these implications because climate change affects the vulnerable and the marginalized more. This ties directly to the value of compassion and justice. So imagine people with lots of money. They could move, they could pick up, they could rebuild their house, they could sell the house, they could build a wall to stop the water from coming in, right? And then think about people without those sorts of resources. They don't have the option of moving. Maybe they can't afford to lose their job. They have to stay there. They can't stop the water from coming in. They maybe don't have anything to rebuild, right? So maybe it's Europe where all the cars just get washed down the street and it's inconvenient, but probably insurance covers it. Maybe it's other places where the pollution related to the oil and gas industry is already undermining the local fishing and the environment, and everything's getting degraded. And then they have a flood, and then all those pollutants just come right into their farm fields and their houses, right? It's a pretty sad state of affairs. So science and faith work hand in hand. And I have to address this because in recent years, strangely enough, it's become kind of popular for some faith groups to embrace ignorance. So we want to fight against that. It makes sense that the natural world would bear the fingerprints of its creator, of its designer. It makes sense that as you would look closely at things, that you'd be able to see the intricacies of the design, and you'd come to appreciate not only the creation, but appreciate what was done by the creator to create things. And science is always questioning itself. It's always saying, well, do we have new information? Let's put that in the theory. Does it still work? Not as cleanly. Let's improve the theory. Science is not scared of being questioned. It's always asking questions. By definition, that's what it does. And sometimes we don't see the same level of questioning on the side of faith, and that can be a real liability. Certainty can be pretty dangerous. We're not necessarily asking, have we got this right? Let's test this out. Oh, new information. Let's start over, right? So as you look in closer at creation, you see more and more wondrous designs. And as you zoom out further and further away, you see wondrous design. This is a picture taken with the Hubble telescope. They basically purchased some expensive telescope time, and they decided to focus the telescope on a blank part of space between some stars where basically there was nothing there. And then after a period of time, this is the picture that they got. And these are not stars, these are galaxies. And so what looks like empty space in space is actually galaxies full of millions of stars. It's even more amazing than you imagined it was. So I find that when I look at nature, I become more thankful. I feel this respect. It's almost like a prayer or supplication. There's this glorification, this worship that takes place. Well, maybe that's just me, but I think you can see how science and faith can go hand in hand. Why people of faith must act? Well, we're called to stewardship. There are quotes from religious texts on caring for the earth. Here's one from the Quran. And do not cause corruption upon the earth after its reformation, and invoke him in fear and aspiration. Indeed, the mercy of Allah is near to the doers of good. We have this moral imperative to protect the vulnerable on the earth. And if any religion has a reputation for defending the vulnerable, it's the Sikhs. And here's a reading from the Guru Granth Sahib. Air is the guru, water is the father, and earth is the great mother of all. Day and night are like two nurses in whose lap the entire world plays. Truth matters. It's about more than what is easy or convenient. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. From the Bible. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land, for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of the one who shed it, suggesting that violence might be a kind of pollution too. Here's another one from the Guru Granth Sahib. The true Lord created the universe. He provides sustenance for all. He is pleased with those who recognize the Creator amidst his creation. People of faith have a history of standing in the gap for the vulnerable. We're called to love our neighbor. Now, there are some shortcomings that might be associated with some faith traditions, maybe not yours. Um, in some cases, people of faith might be accused of being so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good. If we're packing our bags for heaven and all this earthly stuff is just temporary, it's harder to care about it. Does it need to be one or the other? Can we care about both? Or another version of this is some people might be so busy rescuing souls that they fail to care for the bodies those souls inhabit. It could even be a form of Christian heresy called Gnosticism, where a higher value is put on spiritual things and a lower value is put on physical things. It's not scriptural because, of course, the core of the Christian faith is that God became incarnate in Jesus. So God isn't scared of physical stuff. Do we justify the pain and suffering that we see by saying everything is part of God's plan? Oh, it must have happened for a reason. It's part of God's plan. It's reductive, isn't it? It's simple, but is it faithful? Those of us who are familiar with suffering might find that responses like this echo in a way that is hollow. Do we hear teachings in our faith communities that people get what they deserve? That could make it harder to care for victims. There's a famous story of Job's comforters who engaged in victim blaming. Essentially, Job, you know why you're suffering? It's because you have sin in your life. And that wasn't true at all. So, do we have a promise that God will make all things new by himself or with our hands? And that changes things, doesn't it, right? What example does God set for us? Do we see God restoring things or abandoning them? Are we being taught to value the living planet and its creatures? Or is it just kind of, who cares? Just kill the spotted owls if they're in the way of the pipeline. I want to see my stock portfolio go up. Do we have a colonial and extractive mindset where everything is to be subdued, where nature has value only once it's harvested and sold to the highest bidder? Or do we see the value of intact, biodiverse nature that continues to provide environmental services, habitat, and healing, where we take what we need and we leave the rest? And there's a community with the plants and the animals and the people all together. So those are some tricky questions that we want to come to terms with as faith communities. Um, Again, moving out of this section, there's a QR code if you want to use the camera on your phone to open up our website and find more resources. But let's carry on. These are the pictures that we've been using in the slide deck and the credit for where those came from throughout the presentation. All right. Thank you very much.